Why was she the only one left in the dust while they celebrated? The laughter drifted down the firing line, mingling with the sharp tang of burnt powder that still clung to the desert air. Sarah Martinez bent low, her gloved hand brushing against the hot brass casings that glimmered in the sand like discarded coins. One by one, she scooped them into the dented metal bucket slung at her side. The sound was sharp, metallic, clink, 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 the rhythm of someone invisible, someone useful but forgettable. No one looked her way, they never did. To them, she wasn't a soldier with a story. She was background noise, the cleaner, the one who picked up after the real warriors had done their important work. Sergeant Mills barely even bothered to look up as he barked his order across the range. Martinez, make sure you get every last casing, spotless for the next group. Yes, Sergeant, she answered automatically. The words came out steady, obedient, the way they always did. She learned long ago not to lace her voice with resentment. Resentment got you noticed, and being noticed rarely ended well. She kept moving. The sun was merciless, pinning her in place like a bug under glass. Sweat trickled down the side of her face, mixing with the fine grit of dust. The air shimmered above the desert range, the distant horizon wavering like a mirage. The elite sniper unit was packing up their gear just yards away, rifles that gleamed like jewelry, scopes worth more than her monthly pay, cases custom-fitted for their tools of precision. She could hear Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson bragging again. He had a voice built for performance, for gathering attention. He was holding court with the younger marksman, cradling his .338 Lapua Magnum like it was a holy relic. "This beauty," Thompson said, his hand caressing the stock as though it were alive, "can reach out to 1,500 meters with surgical precision. That's the kind of reach only the best can handle. Years of training, years of talent. You don't just wake up one day and pull a trigger at that distance." Sarah kept her head down, but her ears stayed sharp. She'd heard this speech before, the lecture about mental toughness, hand-eye coordination, the physics of the shot. To the others, Thompson was larger than life. To Sarah, he was a man who mistook noise for wisdom. Because she knew something he didn't. She had grown up in the wide-open fields of Montana, where the horizon stretched forever and a rifle was just another tool like a shovel or a lasso. Her grandfather had put a rifle in her hands before she was tall enough to ride alone. He taught her to listen to the wind, to smell the coming rain, to read the mirage lines dancing in the heat. On the ranch, missing meant no supper. Missing meant coyotes among the calves. Out there, 800-meter shots weren't impressive. They were expected. And quietly, without ever showing it, she had learned that distance was never about the weapon. It was about patience, respect, understanding. But here, at Forward Operating Base Razor, patience wasn't rewarded. Only noise was. She shifted her bucket to her other hand, wincing as the weight pulled on her shoulder. The brass casings rang out again. Clink, clink. She wondered if any of them had ever noticed how heavy 1,000 fired rounds could feel. Probably not. They never carried them. The longest confirmed kill in history, Thompson was saying, puffing his chest, was over 3,500 meters. That's more than 2 miles. Imagine it, a bullet in the air for over 6 seconds. You've got to account for wind, humidity, temperature, even the Earth's rotation. That's not just marksmanship. That's art. A younger private, Collins, leaned in, his face lit with awe. "Have you ever even tried something like that, Staff Sergeant?" Thompson laughed, loud and dismissive. "Tried? Kid, I've pushed myself to 1,800 meters, maybe a touch further, but 3,000, that's competition fantasy. Luck more than skill. Real combat isn't about luck." The others chuckled. Sarah kept her mouth shut. She had watched her grandfather settle behind a weathered old hunting rifle and make shots at distances that these men would call dreams. He had taught her that arrogance was the enemy of accuracy. You never beat the environment, you respected it. Her hands paused mid-motion. She could feel their eyes on her now. "What about you, Martinez? Thompson's voice rang out suddenly, sharper now, directed at her. The mocking lilt in it stung. You ever fire anything bigger than a sidearm, or are you more comfortable with a broom? The other snipers turned, smirking, waiting. Sarah straightened slowly, the bucket still in her hand. She met his gaze evenly. I've done some shooting, Staff Sergeant. Some shooting, Thompson repeated, dragging the words, savoring them for the laughs they brought. Boot camp, maybe. Hit a silhouette at 300 meters and called it a day. Something like that, Sarah said evenly, refusing to give them what they wanted, a flinch, an excuse, a crack in the armor. Corporal Williams grinned, leaning in. Bet you couldn't hit a barn door at 500. Leave her alone, Specialist Chin muttered from the side. He was quieter, more thoughtful than the others, but no one ever listened to Chin. Thompson was on a roll now. No, no, Thompson said, holding up a hand as though he were about to deliver a grand performance. Williams has a point. We're always saying anyone can learn to shoot. Martinez here looks interested. Maybe we should give her a taste of the real thing. The heat pressed down heavier. Sarah wished just for a moment that the ground would swallow her whole. Attention was dangerous. Attention made people laugh at you, made them remember you for all the wrong reasons. I should finish my duties, she said quietly. But Thompson wasn't finished. His eyes gleamed, that familiar mix of arrogance and mischief. He wanted a spectacle, and he just found his mark. Tell you what, he said, voice carrying across the silent desert. Let's make this interesting, a challenge. She froze, her bucket heavy in her hand. One shot, he continued. My rifle. You hit a target at 1,000 meters, I'll recommend you for sniper school myself. You miss, he paused, letting the silence stretch, savoring it. Well, maybe you should stick to picking up after the real shooters. The laughter rolled across the firing line like thunder. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't show it. Not here, not now. I appreciate the offer, Staff Sergeant, she said, but I'll stick to my job. Come on, Martinez, Williams jeered. Don't be shy, one shot. What's the worst that happens? You miss. But Thompson wasn't letting it go. His eyes had narrowed. There was something darker there now, not just arrogance, a test, a dare. Forget 1,000, he said suddenly. That's child's play, let's go bigger. He adjusted his spotting scope, scanning the jagged desert horizon until he stopped, grinning. See that outcropping? Looks like a camel's hump, way out past the dunes. Sarah followed his gaze. The rock was barely visible, a shimmer in the heat waves. That's 4,000 meters, Thompson announced. 2.5 miles. I'll paint a target there, say a 24-inch circle. You hit it and I'll do more than recommend you. I'll apologize, to your face. Hell, I'll write the letter myself. But when you miss, and you will, maybe then you'll finally understand the difference between us and support staff. This time the laughter was hesitant, uneasy, because even the cocky privates knew the truth. A 4,000-meter shot wasn't just hard, it was damn near impossible. Sarah set the bucket down slowly. Her heart thudded in her chest, a steady, rising drum. She didn't look at them. She looked at the horizon, at the shimmer, at the distance that had once been nothing more than fields back home. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, even steady. What rifle would I be using? The air shifted. Thompson blinked, caught off guard. For once he didn't have a quick answer. The line of soldiers had gone silent, waiting, watching. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. For the first time in 6 months, every eye was on her. And none of them were laughing. Why hadn't she told them? The question lingered in Sarah's chest as she stood before the group, the bucket of brass at her feet, the weight of the desert sun pressing down on her shoulders. They didn't know her, not really, and maybe that was the point. Which rifle? She had asked, and the silence that followed was heavier than the steel weapon cases stacked along the line. Thompson recovered first, his grin reappearing like a mask. Mine, my .338 Lapua Magnum. Best glass on the market, custom-tuned, trigger set lighter than your heartbeat. But I'll warn you, Martinez, even with a rifle like this, 4,000 meters is beyond fantasy. She nodded, her face unreadable. Inside, though, something old stirred, a memory of windswept plains, her grandfather's hand on her shoulder, the smell of sagebrush after a summer rain. "You see that ridge," her grandfather had said, pointing across the field. "Coyotes hole up there, 800 yards. Hard to see, harder to hit, but they're there. And if you can learn to hit what you can barely see, you'll learn more about patience than any school will ever teach you." She had been 10 years old. The rifle had been longer than her arms, but she'd settled in the dirt, steadying her breathing, listening. She hadn't just been learning to shoot. She'd been learning to wait, to read the ground, the wind, the silence. That silence returned now as the men around her waited for her response. Sarah bent down, placed the bucket neatly aside, and stepped forward. "What's the ballistic coefficient of your ammunition?" she asked. For the first time all day, the smirk on Thompson's face faltered. "Ballistic coefficient," he repeated, thrown off balance. "Yes," she looked him dead in the eye. "Your Sierra Match Kings, the 300 grain, right? What's their BC?" The air tightened. Williams coughed, confused. Collins frowned, trying to recall something from the manual he'd skimmed. Only Specialist Chin tilted his head slightly, interest flickering in his gaze. Thompson cleared his throat. .670, muzzle velocity around 2,700 feet per second. Why? Sarah just nodded, almost to herself. "Good, that helps." The whispers started almost immediately. Where had she learned those words? Why did she sound like she actually knew what she was talking about? Thompson's grin returned, but not as steady now. "You can look up anything on YouTube these days, Martinez. Doesn't mean you know how to pull a trigger." "Maybe." She kept her voice calm, steady, almost casual. "But knowledge doesn't vanish just because it comes from the wrong person." For a moment, silence again. The wind moved across the range flags, fluttering them, carrying dust across the hot air. Then William snorted, "This is gonna be good." Sarah turned away from them, walking to the flag that fluttered midway down the range. She crouched low, her fingers brushing the air, testing its pull. Then she did something none of them expected. She licked her finger, held it up, felt the invisible current slide past her skin. They laughed, nervous, awkward laughter. "Look at her," Williams said. "She thinks she's in some old western." But Chin wasn't laughing. He watched as she pulled a small, battered notebook from her pocket, flipping it open with quick, practiced fingers. Lines of handwritten numbers filled the pages, equations, calculations, corrections. She began writing, cross-referencing with something on her phone screen. "What the hell is she doing?" Collins muttered. She's using a ballistic calculator," Chin said slowly. He couldn't tear his eyes away. "She's inputting conditions, distance, temperature, humidity, wind." The laughter faltered, because it wasn't just show. It wasn't an act. Sarah Martinez was working the problem like someone who had done it before. Thompson's jaw clenched. He hadn't expected this. But Sarah's hands didn't shake. Her pencil scratched across the page, her lips moving silently as she ran the numbers twice, 3 times, checking herself. Then she shut the notebook, slipped it back into her pocket, and walked back toward the rifle stand. "Elevation," she murmured softly, as if speaking to herself. 32 moa, windage about 8 feet left drift, give or take. No one spoke. The desert had gone still, like it was holding its breath. But inside Sarah's chest, a storm raged. She remembered the last time she'd been underestimated like this. Basic training. She had outshot 3 men on the qualification course, but when the scores were posted, no one congratulated her. They laughed it off, said it must have been luck, a glitch in the system, or maybe the targets had been set wrong. She had swallowed the anger, let it sit like lead in her stomach. And she had promised herself one thing: the next time the moment came, she wouldn't explain herself. She would just act. Now that moment was here. She lowered herself behind Thompson's rifle, adjusting the bipod, sliding the stock into her shoulder. The metal was cool, smooth. She adjusted her position until her body lined up naturally with the target. No tension, no force, just alignment. Her cheek pressed against the stock, her eye finding the scope. The orange dot was there, nearly invisible, shimmering in the mirage, 2.5 miles away. Her breath slowed, her pulse steadied. "You understand," Thompson said, his voice cutting through the silence, "that no one makes this shot first try. Not with this rifle, not at this distance." Sarah didn't answer. Because she wasn't aiming for applause. She wasn't aiming for Thompson. She wasn't even aiming for a place at their table. She was aiming for something she couldn't quite put into words. Her grandfather's voice whispered in her mind, "Respect the shot. Don't fight it, don't force it, wait until it comes to you." The heat mirage shimmered, the flags shifted. She waited, breathing in, breathing out, feeling the desert itself alive, restless. And for a moment, she wasn't at Fob Razor. She was 10 years old again, the fields of Montana stretching wide before her, the world holding its breath as she pressed her finger to the trigger of her grandfather's rifle. The men around her didn't see that world, but they saw her, and for the first time they weren't laughing. The silence was total now. The desert, the wind, the watching eyes, all of it. Sarah whispered to herself, barely audible, "Not yet." She let out her breath, steady, patient, unhurried. The perfect moment hadn't arrived, not yet. But it would. And when it did, they would all understand. Why hadn't anyone stopped him? The thought pressed at the back of Sarah's mind as she adjusted the rifle once more, her cheek welded to the cool stock. Thompson's voice still carried down the firing line, loud enough for everyone to hear, but quieter now, almost defensive. He was explaining the shot away before it had even been taken. 4,000 meters isn't combat, it's a circus trick. Even with perfect calculations, you're fighting the rotation of the Earth, the pull of gravity, turbulence across miles of air. At that distance, the target's not a target, it's a prayer. No one laughed this time. They all watched her. Even Williams, whose smirk had been plastered on since sunrise, now shifted on his feet, his gaze darting from her to Thompson and back again. Collins leaned forward, eyes wide, hungry for whatever came next. Chin stayed silent, still, like a man waiting for something inevitable. Sarah ignored them. She had to. The orange dot on the rock was barely more than a shimmer. The heat waves twisted and bent it, making it flicker in and out of clarity. She adjusted the scope slightly, correcting for parallax, aligning her natural point of aim again. Every fraction mattered. Her hands were steady, but her chest was a battlefield. She could feel the pounding of her heart, heavy and insistent, demanding to be noticed. The rational part of her brain whispered, "You don't need this, Sarah. Walk away. Let them laugh. You'll still breathe tomorrow." But another voice, older, firmer, quieter, whispered back, "If you don't do this now, they'll never see you. They'll never know you were here." She remembered the way they looked at her every morning, as if she were part of the scenery, the girl with the bucket, the girl who bent down so they could stand tall, invisible, forgettable. Her grandfather's words rose again, as if carried on the desert wind. "Every shot is a choice. Don't take it unless you're ready to own it. But if you do take it, don't ever look away." Sarah breathed in, held it, let it out. "Martinez." Thompson's voice cracked through the silence like a whip. He'd stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the sand. His face wasn't mocking now. It was tight, controlled. "You don't have to do this. You've already proven your point. Nobody here expects you to hit it. Hell, nobody here even thinks you'll get close. So if you walk away, it won't mean anything." She didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on the scope, on the impossible shimmer of orange. "If I walk away," she said softly, "it'll mean everything." Something in her tone made him flinch. The others shifted, unsettled. They weren't watching a joke anymore. They were watching something they didn't understand, something that didn't fit the story they'd written about her. Sarah checked the wind flags again, 3 miles per hour right to left near her position. But downrange, the mirage bent differently. She scribbled a quick note in her notebook, recalculated the drift, cross-checked it against her phone app. Flight time, 6.2 seconds. Drop, 45 feet. Drift, 7.8. Her pencil paused. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her head, "Don't chase perfect, chase honest. Trust your read, not the math alone. The math is a guide. The wind is the truth." She closed the notebook, slipped it back in her pocket. Her fingers traced the scope's turrets, adjusting elevation, then windage. Each click was a heartbeat, each heartbeat a step closer. When she finally settled again, the world narrowed. The laughter, the stares, the desert heat, all of it faded until there was only the crosshair and the orange dot dancing at the edge of vision. Her breath slowed, her pulse softened. And then the doubts came. What if she missed? She could already see it. The eruption of laughter, the smirks, the whispers behind her back for months to come. They'd call her foolish, arrogant, desperate for attention. She'd never live it down. She'd be the girl who thought she could but couldn't. Her throat tightened. Her finger hovered near the trigger, not touching, just feeling the weight of it. For a moment her hand shook, just enough to scare her. She closed her eyes. And in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw her grandfather again. Not young, not strong, but old, his hands rough, his eyes gentle as he sat beside her on the porch at dusk. "You think too much, Mija," he had said the last time she saw him. "A shot is not a debate, it's a conversation with the world. You listen, you speak, and then you let it go. That's all it is. Don't be afraid of your own voice." Her eyes opened. The rock was waiting, the desert was waiting, the silence was waiting. Her hand steadied. "Wind's dropping," she murmured. The flag sagged, still for a heartbeat. The mirage shimmer steadied just enough. She drew in a breath, held it halfway. Her finger found the trigger's wall, pressing lightly, gently, until the world seemed to hold its breath with her. And then, "Wait," Thompson blurted, suddenly stepping forward. "Don't." Too late. The rifle cracked. The sound tore across the desert, a violent punctuation that echoed against the ridges, a sound that didn't belong to laughter or mockery or doubt. It belonged to certainty. The recoil slammed against her shoulder. The scope jumped. The bullet was gone. 6 seconds. 6 endless seconds. The air seemed to stretch thin. The men around her leaned forward unconsciously, eyes wide, ears straining for a sound that hadn't come yet. Williams muttered something under his breath, but no one answered. Collins gripped the spotting scope so tightly his knuckles turned white. Thompson, face pale, tracked the bullet's flight with desperate precision. Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The desert was silent. 4 seconds, 5. Then, a crack, faint, distant, carried back across 2.5 miles of shimmering heat. The sound of metal on stone. The sound of impact. Sarah lifted her head slowly. The men stood frozen, their faces caught between disbelief and awe. Williams stammered. Collins cursed. Chin's lips parted, his voice caught before he could form words. And Thompson just stared. His hands trembled against the scope as he adjusted the focus again and again, refusing to believe what his eyes had already told him. Finally he spoke. His voice was thin, barely more than a whisper. "Dead center." The words hung in the air like smoke. No one moved, no one breathed. Sarah pushed herself up from the rifle, her face calm, unreadable. She brushed the dust from her hands, picked up her bucket and stood. She didn't need to say anything. The desert had spoken for her. Why wasn't anyone speaking? The desert, normally alive with small sounds, shifting grit, distant echoes of training fire. even the murmur of men who thought themselves untouchable, was now gripped by a silence so sharp it cut through every heart on that line. Sarah rose slowly from behind the rifle. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of powder still drifting from the barrel. Her face was calm, almost detached, but her chest still hammered, her blood racing with the secret she'd finally revealed. The bucket waited at her feet, half filled with forgotten casings, the symbol of who she had been to them only minutes ago, the nobody, the cleaner. Now they looked at her, as though she were someone else entirely. Collins was the first to break. "No way," he whispered, his voice cracking, too young to mask the disbelief. "No way she just—" "She did," Chin interrupted quietly, eyes fixed on the distant rock. His tone wasn't astonishment. It was recognition, respect. He'd seen enough in the way she prepared, the way she waited. For him, the outcome had been inevitable. Williams wasn't ready to surrender. He shook his head, forcing a laugh that never quite landed. "Must have been luck, blind luck. She couldn't do that again if she tried." His words rang hollow. Even he heard it. Because the echo of the bullet's strike was still carried by the desert wind, undeniable. Thompson said nothing. He hadn't moved since lowering his eye from the spotting scope. His jaw clenched, his face pale, as though the sun itself had been stripped of its heat. His whole life, he had measured himself by what others couldn't do, by the distances no one else dared attempt. And in the space of 6 seconds, Sarah Martinez had erased every line he'd drawn. Her eyes finally lifted to meet his, steady, calm, not triumphant, not mocking, just steady. He broke the silence at last. His voice was low, strained. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" The memory was instant, the wide Montana sky, the soft rasp of her grandfather's voice, the steady weight of his old hunting rifle in her hands. But Sarah didn't tell them everything. Some things were too personal, too sacred to cheapen with explanations. "My grandfather," she said simply. "He taught me. He was a competitor, long-range, king of 2 Mile 3 times." The words hit like another shot fired downrange. The men shifted uncomfortably. None of them had asked who she was before today. None of them had cared. And now, in the space of a few breaths, the ground they stood on felt unsteady. "Why didn't you tell us?" Collins asked, his voice not accusatory but searching. He wanted to understand the hole in their perception, the gap they had never tried to fill. Sarah's answer was quiet, almost fragile. No one asked. The weight of it landed heavier than the rifle's report. They looked at her differently now, as though the uniform she wore had changed in an instant, though it hadn't. She was still the same soldier who had bent for hours picking brass from the dirt. Still the one they ignored in the mess hall, the one whose name rarely left their lips except when ordering her to clean. But she had done something none of them could deny. She had stolen silence from the desert, and silence is harder to earn than respect. William scowled, unwilling to give ground. "One shot doesn't make you a sniper, doesn't mean you belong in our unit." Sarah didn't flinch. "You're right," she said, "it doesn't." She picked up the bucket. The casings rattled again, clink, 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 as though mocking the weight of the moment. She turned away, walking back down the line, her posture steady, her back straight. She didn't need to stay and listen to their arguments. She had already said everything she needed to say, without words, without boasting. Behind her, the silence stretched on. Thompson finally exhaled, a sound that carried both defeat and awakening. "Dead center," he said again, as though repeating it might help him believe it. The story spread across Fob Razor like wildfire. By the time Sarah returned to her quarters, whispers followed her down the corridors. Soldiers she had never spoken to before turned their heads when she passed. Some nodded in respect. Others frowned, trying to reconcile the girl with the bucket to the legend they'd just heard. She sat on her cot, the thin mattress creaking under her weight, staring at her hands. They were still trembling just slightly, not from nerves, from release. She had carried it for so long, the silence, the invisibility, the truth that no one cared to see. And in one shot, one impossible arc of metal across the sky, she had let it all out. And yet a strange emptiness lingered. Because part of her had hoped the shot would change something inside her, that the gnawing ache of being dismissed, ignored, underestimated would vanish with the crack of the rifle. But it hadn't. The ache was still there. All she had done was show them what she could do. She hadn't shown herself who she was. Not yet. 2 days later, Thompson found her. He stood outside the small maintenance shed where she stored her cleaning supplies, his posture uncertain, his voice unsteady. "Martinez." She turned, wiping her hands on a rag, waiting. He swallowed hard. For once, the confidence that had carried every word he spoke seemed absent. "I owe you an apology, more than one probably." "You don't owe me anything," she said flatly. "No," he said firmly, surprising himself. "I do. I judged you. I made assumptions. I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter what I thought, I was wrong." For the first time, Sarah saw something human in his eyes. Not arrogance, not bravado, just a man who had been forced to confront his own blindness. "You've got a gift," he said. "Something rare. I'd be honored to write that letter, the commendation, the transfer." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Thank you." But her voice was cool, detached, because respect given after humiliation never tasted as sweet as respect earned freely. Within a week, official orders came down. Sarah Martinez was reassigned for sniper evaluation. The very same men who had once sneered at her were now tasked with helping prepare her for advanced training. Some resented it, some embraced it, but none ignored her anymore. At the range, Collins peppered her with questions, his youthful awe undimmed. "How'd you read the wind like that? How'd you know when to hold? I swear I blinked and thought you missed." Chin only gave her quiet nods, but they carried weight. The kind of acknowledgement that said, "I saw you. I always did." William still scowled, but even he no longer spoke her name with disdain. And Thompson, he became her shadow. Always there, always watching, his voice stripped of mockery. He became her spotter during training, his corrections careful, his advice grounded in humility he'd never shown before. But Sarah carried her own quiet burden. Every shot she took, every target she dropped during drills wasn't for them. It wasn't even for herself. It was for a man long gone, whose voice still carried across every field of her memory. "Respect the shot, respect yourself." At night, lying in the dark barracks, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd ever find peace in proving herself. Or if she was destined to keep chasing moments like the one on the range, moments that proved nothing except that she was tired of being unseen. Because if there was one truth she couldn't escape, it was this. The shot had changed how they saw her, but it hadn't yet changed how she saw herself. And deep down, she knew the desert hadn't given her its hardest test yet. Why did it feel like she was back at zero? Sarah stood at the gates of the sniper school, her duffel slung across her shoulder, the desert wind tugging at her uniform. Around her, men who had been hand-picked, vetted, and trained for years filed in with the certainty of belonging. They carried themselves like they'd been born for this place. She carried herself like someone who wasn't sure if the ground beneath her would hold. The moment she stepped into the classroom, she felt the stares. Some were curious, some dismissive. A few carried the sharp edge of open hostility. She didn't need to hear the whispers to know what they thought. The girl from the maintenance line, the story, the legend shot, the fluke. The instructors didn't help. They didn't introduce her differently, didn't announce why she was there, but she saw it in their eyes too. They knew her name. They knew the story. And stories in the sniper community traveled faster than bullets. "Martinez," one of the senior instructors called, glancing at his clipboard. "Welcome to hell, hope you're ready." "Yes, Sergeant," she answered, her voice steady, though her throat was dry. The first week wasn't about rifles. It was about breaking them down. Long days in the classroom, calculations, atmospheric science, hours of staring at wind charts until the numbers blurred. Long nights on the range, not firing but spotting, adjusting, correcting. Watching others take shots while she stood behind a scope, forced to measure what they missed. Her mind knew the work. Her grandfather had drilled her in these things long before she'd ever worn a uniform. But knowing it at a kitchen table in Montana wasn't the same as being expected to prove it in front of men who already doubted her. One evening during a wind-reading exercise, a candidate 2 rows over muttered just loud enough. "Must be nice, walking in with a story. Rest of us had to earn it." The words landed heavier than they should have. Sarah tightened her jaw, said nothing, and kept writing her corrections in the logbook. But when she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of the barracks, the thought gnawed at her. Did she really earn it? The shot at Fob Razor had been perfect, but perfect shots could be accidents too. Even Thompson had said it before she pulled the trigger. Luck was always a factor at extreme range. Had she proved herself that day, or had she just gotten lucky at the one moment luck mattered most? The question kept her awake long after the others had drifted to sleep. Field week broke her body before it broke her mind. The rucksacks were heavy, the marches endless. They pushed them across canyons and scrubland with nothing but a map, a compass, and each other. Candidates dropped, one by one, heat exhaustion claiming those who hadn't respected the desert. Sarah pushed on, quiet, steady, step after step. One night, after 16 hours under the sun, she collapsed on the dirt beside another candidate, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running across his jaw. He'd barely spoken to her since the course began. "You don't talk much, Martinez," he said, his voice low. "No one's listening," she replied, her words edged with exhaustion. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Fair enough." After a moment he added, "That shot of yours, I don't care what anyone says. You don't hit 4,000 meters by luck." She turned her head toward him, surprised. His face was unreadable in the dark, but his voice carried conviction. "What's your name?" she asked. "Rays." He stretched out on his pack, eyes already closing. "And don't waste your breath trying to convince the others. Half of them are waiting for you to fail so they can say they were right about you. The other half are afraid you might actually be better." She thought about his words long after he fell asleep. Afraid she might be better, afraid of her. The idea felt strange, powerful, dangerous. The shooting began in week 3. Targets at 600 meters, then 800, then 1,000. By the time they reached 1,500, half the candidates were already behind, struggling to keep pace with the calculations and corrections. Sarah wasn't flawless. She dropped shots. The wind caught her off guard more than once. She misread a mirage line and missed a target by a full meter. The instructors barked, the other candidates smirked. Every mistake gnawed at her, sharper because of who she was. When Collins, younger, less experienced, missed, he got a slap on the back and encouragement to adjust. When Sarah missed, she saw the quiet satisfaction in certain faces. Proof to them that she didn't belong. But she didn't quit. Day after day she adjusted, corrected, learned. By the end of week 5, her grouping was tighter than almost anyone else. Her notebook filled with calculations, her eyes sharper with every session. And still the whispers came. "She's good for someone who walked in from the cleaning shed. Bet she won't last until the stalking phase." 4,000 meters was luck, everyone knows it. At night she replayed the shot in her head. The waiting, the trigger press, the impossible stillness, the crack of impact. She tried to convince herself it hadn't been luck, but sometimes in the quiet hours she wasn't sure anymore. The stalking phase was worse. 2-man teams were dropped into scrubland and ordered to move unseen into position, creeping across terrain under the eyes of instructors armed with binoculars. One mistake, one flash of movement, and they failed. Sarah's heart hammered louder than her footsteps as she crawled across dirt and gravel, her face streaked with sweat and camouflage. Every inch forward was agony, her elbows raw, her knees torn. At her side, Ray's moved like water, steady, fluid, controlled. His presence was the only thing keeping her anchored. "You're breathing too shallow," he whispered at one point, his mouth barely moving. She adjusted, steadying herself. The world shrank to the dirt in front of her nose, the slow rhythm of crawling forward, the sound of her heartbeat in her ears. Hours passed, the sun burned her skin, ants crawled across her hands, every nerve screamed to stop. But she didn't. When they finally reached their firing position, when the instructor called their number and failed to spot them even after minutes of searching, Sarah felt something she hadn't in weeks. Not pride. Belonging. For the first time since arriving at sniper school, she wasn't just the girl with the story. She was a sniper candidate who had passed the hardest test they could throw at her. And when Reyes looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, she knew he saw her for what she was. Not luck, not fluke, not story. A soldier. Graduation day came months later. Sarah stood in formation, her rifle slung across her shoulder, the instructors calling names one by one. She barely heard them. She only heard the wind, the distant echoes of shots fired across fields of memory. Her name was called. She stepped forward. "Top of her class," the senior instructor announced, his voice firm, carrying weight. For exceptional ability to read environmental conditions, adapt under pressure, and demonstrate patience beyond expectation, Sarah Martinez. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was real. Sarah saluted, received her patch, and stepped back into line. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let them see it, because the truth was simple. She had walked into sniper school as a story, a fluke, a girl with a lucky shot. She was walking out as something else entirely. But even as the patch pressed against her shoulder, the doubt still lingered, quiet but insistent. Because proving herself in training wasn't the same as proving herself in combat. And Sarah knew the desert hadn't given her its hardest shot yet. Why did the silence feel different this time? Sarah crouched low in the belly of a ruined building, her rifle resting across her knees, her breath steady but shallow. The silence here wasn't like the silence of the desert training range. It wasn't patient or vast or waiting to be broken by her decision. This silence was alive, heavy, predatory. Somewhere out there, beyond the jagged skyline of a war-torn village, beyond the collapsed walls and dust-choked alleys, was an enemy sniper, invisible, waiting. Her unit had moved in at dawn, tasked with supporting a patrol that had taken fire in the narrow streets. The call for overwatch came quick, urgent, desperate. Now she was here. First real mission. First time where the consequence of failure wasn't laughter or scorn, but death. And the weight of it pressed down harder than the desert sun ever had. Reyes was beside her, scanning through the spotting scope, his movements calm, deliberate. The same Reyes who'd crawled through scrubland at her side during sniper school. The same man who had told her not to waste breath on those waiting for her to fail. Now his voice was low, steady, almost mechanical. Sector 3, rooftop, 4 o'clock, possible glint. Sarah adjusted her scope, aligning her rifle with his callout. Through the glass, she caught the faintest shimmer, sunlight bouncing off something metallic, high above the cracked roofline. Her pulse quickened, the enemy sniper. Distance, 1,200 meters. Wind, variable, shifting between the alleyways like a restless ghost. She measured it silently, her lips moving without sound, the calculations pouring into her notebook, into her mind. Reyes didn't interrupt, he just waited, trusted her process. But trust was heavier now, because she wasn't the only one in danger. Below, their unit was pinned down. The patrol had taken cover inside an abandoned shop, radioing up that they couldn't move without taking fire. And if Sarah didn't make this shot, if she hesitated, miscalculated, or cracked under the weight of the silence, those men would die. This wasn't about respect anymore. It wasn't about proving herself to doubters. This was about responsibility. And responsibility terrified her more than doubt ever had. She breathed in, held, breathed out. Her finger found the trigger's edge. "Wind shifting left," Reyes murmured. 2 mils hold. She adjusted. Her crosshairs steadied over the faint glint. And then she saw something that made her hesitate. Not just the rifle barrel, not just the shimmer of glass. Movement, small, fragile. A child's head ducking behind a crumbling wall near the sniper's nest. Her chest froze. It wasn't unusual in war zones. Families were caught between sides, often forced to live in ruins, sometimes used as shields. She knew that. She'd been warned. But knowing it wasn't the same as staring at it through her scope. If she missed by even inches. Her throat tightened. Her hands trembled for the first time since she picked up a rifle. "Martinez," Reyes whispered, urgency in his tone now. "Take the shot." She couldn't answer. Her grandfather's voice came unbidden, quiet and firm. "Respect the shot. Respect what it means. Don't ever fire blind to the weight of it." Her mind screamed if she waited, if she hesitated, the sniper would fire first, and someone below would die. But if she fired now, and the shot went wrong, an innocent life would end by her hand. The silence pressed harder, suffocating. "Martinez," Reyes said again, sharper now. "He's got our patrol locked. We don't have time." Her finger hovered, her breath burned. And in that terrible pause, she understood something she hadn't in training. The true cost of being invisible wasn't being ignored. It was being unseen when you made choices no one else would ever understand. The wind dropped for a heartbeat. The flags in her mind's eye sagged, just like they had that day at Fob Razor. The mirage steadied. Her decision crystallized. Not perfect, not certain, but hers. She exhaled, slow, steady, controlled. The rifle cracked. The recoil slammed her shoulder. The scope jumped and then settled. Through the glass, she saw the enemy sniper jerk back, his rifle clattering against the rooftop. The glint vanished. Silence reigned for half a heartbeat. Then a cry echoed through the ruins below as the patrol scrambled out, sprinting toward safety. The child was gone, safe, hidden. Sarah didn't move, didn't speak. Her hands stayed locked around the rifle, her breath ragged now, her chest tight with something that wasn't relief. Reyes lowered the spotting scope, his face unreadable. "Good shot," he said finally. She didn't answer. Because in that moment, good felt wrong, too small, too clean. The weight of it pressed deeper now. She had saved lives, she had ended one. And no amount of training, no patch on her shoulder, no applause from instructors could prepare her for the gravity of both truths sitting in the same breath. That night back at the forward operating post, Sarah lay awake on her cot, the echoes of the day circling endlessly. She saw the enemy sniper fall again and again, each time in sharper detail. She saw the patrol running free. She saw the child's fleeting shadow. And somewhere between those images, she saw herself, and she wasn't sure who that self was anymore. The girl with the bucket, the legend with the 4,000-meter shot, the sniper who had just saved lives, the sniper who had just taken one. The weight of all those selves pressed down until sleep became impossible. Reyes sat on his cot across from her, cleaning his rifle. He didn't look up when he spoke. "You hesitated," he said simply. Sarah stiffened. "But you didn't freeze." He glanced at her now, his expression softer. "That's the difference. Everyone hesitates their first time. The ones who freeze, they don't come back." She turned her face away, staring at the shadows on the wall. "I saw a kid." Reyes didn't respond immediately. He set down his cleaning cloth, leaned back against the wall, and exhaled. "Yeah, Sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't, sometimes you wish you hadn't. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he added, "What matters is you made a choice. You owned it. That's all we can do out here." Sarah closed her eyes. The words were meant as comfort, but they felt heavier somehow, because owning it didn't mean forgiving it. And she wondered, lying in the darkness, if she would ever forgive herself for being both savior and executioner in the same heartbeat. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's reputation shifted again. She wasn't the story of the 4,000-meter shot anymore. She was something quieter, something sharper. Whispers spread through the unit, "Martinez doesn't miss." It wasn't true, she missed plenty, every sniper did, but the misses weren't what stayed with people. The hits were, the patrol saved, the ambush broken, the convoy protected. Every shot she took carried weight now, each one another conversation with the desert, the wind, the silence. And each one left her a little heavier than before. Because every time her bullet found its mark, she remembered the child. She remembered what it meant to fire not at paper or steel, but at a life. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Thompson's voice came crackling over the SAT radio. He was her spotter again on this deployment, a strange turn of fate, but one she'd accepted. "You ready, Martinez?" he asked, his tone no longer mocking but steady, almost reverent. She settled behind her rifle, eye to the scope, her crosshairs steady on a target 2 kilometers out. "I'm ready," she said. But deep down, she knew readiness wasn't about the rifle anymore. It was about the weight she carried, the silence, the responsibility, the choices. And whether she could keep carrying them without losing herself. Why did every mission feel heavier than the last? Sarah lay prone on a rooftop of crumbling concrete, her cheek pressed to the stock of her rifle, her breathing steady but shallow. Below her, a convoy moved cautiously through a narrow valley road, the armored vehicles groaning against the uneven dirt track. She was their shadow, their unseen guardian. And once again she waited. The wind tugged at her hood. Dust stung her eyes. The silence around her was the same silence she had felt before every shot since that first one at Fob Razor, the kind of silence that seemed to hold its breath, daring her to decide whether to break it. She spotted movement at the edge of her scope, a flash of sunlight off metal, a figure crouched behind a distant rock formation, shouldering an RPG. Distance, 1,700 meters. Wind shifting left to right uneven. Angle downhill 5 degrees. Her mind calculated automatically, the numbers sliding into place like gears turning. She exhaled, adjusted her aim, and pressed the trigger. The figure collapsed before the rocket ever left the tube. The convoy rolled on. The patrol lived. And Sarah carried another life on her shoulders. By now, the men whispered her name with reverence. "Martinez doesn't miss." It was said at briefings, in hushed conversations at chow, in after-action reports that carried her legend far beyond the dusty base. But Sarah hated the whisper. Because it wasn't true. She had missed, more than once. A round carried by a gust of wind had buried itself in sand just inches from its target, and the man she'd been aiming for had slipped away into the shadows. Another time, the shimmer of heat mirage had deceived her eye, pulling her shot wide. And each miss haunted her even more than the hits. Because a miss didn't just mean failure. It meant someone lived who might kill again. And every hit meant someone would never rise again. The math of war was unforgiving, and it was written on her soul in marks no one else could see. One night after a long mission, she sat outside the barracks alone, her rifle propped beside her, the desert stars glittering cold and endless above. Reyes joined her, lowering himself onto the sand with a sigh. "You're quiet tonight," he said. She gave him a look. "When am I not?" He chuckled. "Fair, but it's different now. You're carrying it." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. He was right. Reyes leaned back, staring at the stars. You know, when I was a kid, I thought being a sniper would feel like power, like control. But it doesn't, does it? Feels like carrying the world on your back and nobody even sees it. Sarah's voice was low, rough. Sometimes I don't even know who I am anymore. Am I the girl with the bucket, the one they laughed at, or the one they whisper about now? Neither feels real. Reyes turned his head, studying her. You're the one who makes choices no one else can. That's who you are. She looked down at her hands, scarred and raw from days of crawling over stone and sand. And what if one day I make the wrong one? Reyes didn't answer. The silence stretched. Because they both knew the truth. One wrong choice, one wrong trigger pull, and the weight would be unbearable. The missions piled on, each one blending into the next, each one demanding precision, patience, silence. One afternoon, after a brutal sandstorm, they set up overwatch on a supply route. Sarah settled in, her body aching from the endless crawl across gravel. Through her scope, she spotted two men setting up a mortar, their movements hurried but skilled. Reyes whispered the range, 2 clicks, wind steady, you're good. She adjusted, centered, and fired. The first man fell instantly. The second dropped to his knees, clutching his comrade, his face twisted in shock and grief. Sarah watched through her scope as he pulled the body closer, shaking, refusing to let go. Her finger hovered on the trigger. The second man wasn't firing. He wasn't aiming. He wasn't even fighting. He was just mourning. Her chest ached. Martinez, Reyes whispered urgently. He's still a threat, take the shot. But she couldn't move. Because in that moment, the man looked like every soldier she'd ever known holding onto a fallen friend. He looked like Thompson cradling a brother in arms. He looked like Reyes if she were the one lying still in the dirt. Her breath hitched, and the silence roared louder than ever. Finally, she lowered her rifle. He's not firing. Reyes' jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He called it in. The unit below approached cautiously, securing the area. By the time they reached the mortar site, the second man was gone, vanished into the ruins with his grief. That night, Reyes confronted her. You should have taken the shot, he said flatly. You hesitated. He wasn't aiming, Sarah snapped. Her voice cracked, the dam breaking for the first time. He wasn't fighting, he was just human. Rey's eyes softened, but his tone stayed firm. So were the men in that convoy he was about to shell. You can't carry both sides, Martinez. It'll crush you. She turned away, her hands shaking. Maybe it already is. The nightmares began soon after. She dreamed of scopes that never steadied, of targets that turned into children at the last second, of bullets that curved back toward her own chest. She woke drenched in sweat, gasping for air, her hands clawing at sheets as if they were the ground beneath her body. By day, she was the legend. By night, she was the broken one, fractured between duty and humanity, unable to find the line between the two. But still, she didn't stop. Because the missions never stopped. And she knew that if she quit, if she dropped her rifle, someone else would take her place, someone who might not hesitate, who might not care. And maybe her hesitation, her ache, her silent war with herself, was what made her necessary. Months passed. Sarah became the ghost of Fob Razor, spoken of in whispers, respected by officers who once overlooked her, admired by soldiers who never knew her before. But admiration was a thin shield against the toll. One evening, Thompson, her old tormentor, now her spotter on many missions, sat with her after a long day. The man who once mocked her now cleaned her rifle as if it were sacred, his hands careful, his voice quiet. "You changed me, Martinez," he said suddenly. She looked up, surprised. "I used to think it was all about the shot, distance, precision, bragging rights, but you," he shook his head, searching for words, "you remind me it's about the weight, the responsibility. You carry it even when it breaks you." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Sometimes I wonder if carrying it is breaking me for good." Thompson met her eyes. For once there was no arrogance in his face, only truth. Maybe, but I think that's the price of being the one who does miss. Sarah looked away, her eyes burning. Because she knew the price wasn't one she could stop paying. Not yet. And deep down, she feared part of her would never come back whole. Why did this one feel different? Sarah lay still in the dirt, her rifle resting against the crumbling ledge of a half-ruined wall. The village below was quiet, too quiet, its alleys empty, its doors closed. Intelligence said the insurgents had moved through only hours ago, setting charges along the convoy's route. But Sarah wasn't here for explosives. She was here because of him. The enemy sniper, the ghost they whispered about in briefings, the one who had claimed 3 of their men in the past week, precise, patient, cold. A mirror of herself. And tonight, she was the one meant to stop him. Reyes crouched beside her, his scope sweeping across the rooftops, the windows, the shadows. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. He didn't need to. They worked together long enough to know silence was part of the job. Her chest rose and fell steady, but beneath the surface something churned. Every mission she'd carried the weight. Every shot she'd taken, she'd felt the echoes. And now, staring across the rooftops, waiting for a ghost she had never seen, Sarah felt something new. Not fear, not doubt. Recognition. This wasn't just another target. This was the reflection of what she had become. A weapon hidden in silence. Hours passed. The sun fell, the village bathed in the dull blue of evening. Shadows stretched long, covering corners, swallowing alleys whole. Then a glint. Ray stiffened. Rooftop 1 o'clock near the water tower. Sarah adjusted her scope. There he was, faint, barely visible, but there. His rifle barrel caught the last thread of light. His eye, no doubt, was pressed to his scope, scanning for prey. Distance, 1,600 meters. Wind steady, 2 miles right. Angle level. A clean shot. Her finger brushed the trigger. But then she froze. Because in the faint outline of his form, she didn't just see an enemy. She saw herself. How many times had she lain exactly like that? Waiting, watching, unseen, carrying the weight of a choice no one else would understand. And for the first time in her career, she wondered what it looked like from the other side. Did someone Sarah sit in his memory, whispering lessons of patience, of respect for the shot? Did he carry the same nightmares, the same cracks in his soul? Or was he simply another killer, cold and hollow, without the weight that crushed her every night? Her hand trembled. Ray's voice was a low growl. "Martinez, take the shot." She didn't answer. Her crosshair rested steady on the faint shimmer of his position. She could end it now, stop the ghost that haunted their patrols, save lives. But another thought cut through her mind. If I kill him, do I kill what I fear I've become, or do I only confirm it? Her chest tightened, her breathing caught. "Martinez," Reyes hissed, urgency now, desperation. "We don't have time, he'll fire first if you don't." Sarah blinked. The world narrowed to her scope, to the shimmer of glass across the way. And then she saw movement. Not the sniper. A girl. A child, clutching a bucket, darting across the rooftop just beneath his perch, moving too fast, too unaware of the rifles that framed her existence. Sarah's chest broke open. Because in that moment, she wasn't aiming at the sniper anymore. She was aiming at herself, the girl no one saw, carrying the weight no one cared to carry, moving quietly through the world while others dismissed her. Her finger froze. The silence screamed. The sniper shifted, aligning his barrel. Sarah knew the signs. He had found his shot. If she didn't fire now, one of her men would die. Her mind fractured. 2 paths split before her: fire and confirm what she feared she was, or hesitate and risk lives she was sworn to protect. She closed her eyes for one heartbeat, just one. And she heard her grandfather again. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Her eyes opened. Her crosshair steadied. She shifted, a fraction of a degree, enough to pull her line away from the shimmer of the glass and down, into the stone ledge that framed his nest. She pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The round slammed into the wall just inches from his position, shattering stone, kicking dust into the air. Through her scope, she saw the enemy sniper jerk back, startled, his cover blown, his position compromised. Shouts rose in the distance as their unit moved. The ghost had fled. Not dead, not gone, but fled. Sarah lowered her rifle, her breath ragged, her chest on fire. Ray's voice cut sharp. "Why didn't you finish it?" She didn't answer at first. Her hands shook as she pulled away from the scope. Finally her voice came, soft but steady, because sometimes it isn't about the shot, sometimes it's about the choice. Ray stared at her, anger and disbelief warring in his eyes, but then he stopped, because he saw something else there too, something unshakable. Not arrogance, not doubt. Conviction. The patrol lived that night. The convoy made it through. The enemy sniper vanished back into the shadows, his legend intact. And Sarah's legend changed. Some said she had missed. Some said she had shown mercy. Some said she had made a mistake that would cost lives later. But Sarah didn't argue with any of them, because she knew the truth. She hadn't missed, she had chosen. She had chosen to remind herself, and anyone who might ever whisper her name, that being a sniper wasn't about ending lives. It was about guarding them, about carrying the unbearable weight and still knowing when not to add more. Years later, when asked about that night, Sarah always gave the same answer. "It wasn't my hardest shot, it was my hardest silence. Pulling the trigger wasn't the challenge, choosing where to point it was." And when they pressed her, when they asked why she had let the ghost slip away, she only smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The desert wind still moved across Fob Razor, stirring the range flags, carrying whispers of her impossible shot and the choices that followed. New recruits trained there, picking up brass, sweating under the sun, dreaming of the day they'd be noticed. And somewhere among them, someone like Sarah would rise, someone underestimated, someone invisible, until the silence asked them for a choice. And they, too, would learn that the truest strength isn't in pulling the trigger. It's in knowing when not to.